Hi, in this video about rape culture and feminism, I will be breaking down the male response on the issue that is sexual violence, and I will be explaining the effects that toxic masculinity has on our society. So when we think about different solutions to help solve this main issue that is sexual violence, our first instinct is often directed to the instant protection of girls and women, usually based on false conception, instead of addressing the root of the problem that is education. So we say phrases like "don't walk alone at night," "cover yourself up," or "don't drink too much" to our girls and women. We give them tips on how to protect themselves, like holding their keys between their knuckles when they walk alone, or sharing their location to some friends in case anything happens. While these tips can be really helpful in some situations, most of them are solely based on the false impression that women are partly responsible for being sexually assaulted and harassed. By saying "don't walk alone at night," we take away women's freedom. By saying "cover yourself up," we objectify girls' and women's bodies, and again, we take away their freedom of wearing what they want. By saying "don't drink too much," we assume that taking advantage of someone's vulnerability is acceptable. Although those answers are an attempt of protecting women, they contribute to the rape culture within our society and restrain women's voices by making up excuses for the terrible actions of sexual offenders. But those kinds of excuses are not helping at all to put this vicious circle to an end. In fact, the only way to make sure this issue does not persist is by educating young boys and men on the importance of consent and on how to be a good ally. So toxic masculinity is probably one of the most significant consequences of rape culture, and its dangerous effects have a massive role on how we educate young boys. Toxic masculinity, or manhood, refers to the stereotypes perpetuated in our society coming from traditional gender roles. For women, we often talk about kindness and care. We associate them with emotionality and compassion. While for men, we value courage, intelligence. We also associate them with the negative attribute of aggressivity. Over the years, those expectations on men and women influenced our education system, and it created what we now call toxic masculinity, which imposes limits on what are the acceptable traits that it takes to be a man. By narrowing down the definition of masculinity to the very limited characteristics, it invalidates men's emotions and feelings. It pushes them to use violence as a response instead of vulnerability and introspection, which is truly harmful for everyone. For women, those toxic traits have an impact on their safety when we think about sexual assault and harassment, but it also affects the way women are listened to when they speak about this main issue. As a response to feminist demands on wanting to put an end to the rape culture in our society, we often hear the words "not all men." And this sentence, usually used as a way to exempt men from their responsibilities, proves that women's concerns are not being heard correctly. And by saying "not all men," we avoid the main subject, being that in a society based on patriarchy, it is the job of every man not only to respect, listen to women and learn about consent, but also to educate themselves and others and to call out harmful and toxic behaviors surrounding them. Another critic made against feminist demands is usually concerning men's higher suicide rate. Men's mental health is obviously a really important issue that needs recognition. In fact, toxic masculinity has been proven to have a negative impact on their mental health, mostly because men's emotions and feelings are being repressed and disregarded. Like I mentioned before, the fact that we do not expect men to be vulnerable puts them in a damaging situation and may lead to suicidal thoughts. Although men's mental health has to be more discussed, this argument against the feminist conversation of sexual violence does not help either group. In fact, interrupting women's demands only invalidates their concerns. In conclusion, to become a good ally to the feminist cause, dismantling toxic masculinity and educating our boys and men on the subject could truly be helpful for women that have to live through the constant fear of being harassed, even assaulted.